Islam family, Tazba Sarbay. Today is Monday, July 16th, 1432, 2012 AD. Just one moment, please. Close that down. Yeah, so last class we talked about taxes in Canada, taxes in the U.S. Systems, and there were artists who were being caught for, tax evasion and different charges. So we got into the laying of tax, what it was for, and so we'll just recap for anyone who missed that class. And basically, for Canada, we have a timeline. Found this on a website, Canadian Legal History. I quoted the website www.duhaime.org. So it says by 1917, Canada had its fair share of unique finance ministers. There had been Alexander Galt, Canada's first Minister of Finance, who had resigned before the first Parliament had ever met. His successor, Francis Hincks, caused a resignation from the conservative ranks of one of its brightest young backbenchers. The same backbencher, Richard Cartwright, became Minister of Finance during the short four-year prime ministership, 1873 to 1878, of Right Honourable Alexander Mackenzie. Then you have Wilfrid Laurier, who quelled a separatist provincial government in Nova Scotia by bringing its premier into the federal cabinet as finance minister. William Fielding remained at the position for 15 consecutive years and later returned under Mackenzie King in 1921 for another 4. Okay. It was during the 10-year hiatus in Fielding's cabinet career that Conservative Prime Minister Robert Borden appointed Sir Thomas White to the ministry. There he is. White, a lawyer and former trust company manager, would soon be entrusted with the finances of the young Dominion during the terrible crisis of World War I. So further on it goes, the cost of the war to Canada had reached $600 million. White told the House, this is in 1916 dollars. Right? So basically, World War I comes and the debt builds up, right, for Canada to be involved in 1916. And then it says, already Great Britain and the United States has implemented income tax schemes, but, added White, it would appear to me that income tax should not be resorted to in Canada, at least not until the House went into committee of the whole on July 25th, 1917. On that day, the 50-year-old finance minister tabled a resolution which called for income tax 4% on all income of single men over $2,000. For others, the personal exemption was $3,000. For those Canadians with annual incomes of more than $6,000, that tax ranged from 2 to 25%. Right? So here's his quote. Sir Thomas White, Minister of Finance. Mr. Chairman, I desire today to lay before this committee proposals for a national measure of income taxation. Hitherto, we have relied upon duties of customs and of excise, postal rates, and other miscellaneous sources of revenue. Canada has been and will continue during the lifetime of those present today to be a country inviting immigration. I have therefore thought it desirable that we should not be known to the outside world as a country of heavy individual taxation. We are, however, confronted with grave conditions arising out of the war. The time has arrived when we must resort to direct taxation. I am confident, Mr. Chairman, that the people of Canada, whose patriotism during this war has been so often and so nobly proven, will, in light of present conditions, which call for it, cheerfully accept the burden and the sacrifice of this additional taxation. We cannot see very far ahead in these days. We do not know how long this war will last. We do not know what the attitude of the people of this country will be upon the many questions, social, industrial, financial, and fiscal. Therefore, I have placed no time limit upon this measure, but merely have placed upon Hansard the suggestion that a year or two after the war is over, the measure should be reviewed by the Minister of Finance of the day, with a view of judging whether it is suitable to the conditions which then prevail. In other words, White hoped this tax would not much outlast the war, right? So he insisted on calling the bill the War Tax Upon Income Bill, but it was changed to be the War Measures Act. Not War Measures Act. Basically, a temporary tax bill. And here we are, basically, 100 years later, and the suggestion was that a couple years after the war, the tax be reviewed. Now, basically, what happened was that ability for the Congress to simply pass that tax bill without people being involved, let's say, regardless of the fiat nature of the government. The War Measures Act 1914, okay, that was 1914, the war starts, World War I, so this War Measures Act is passed. Because of this act now, the government is gives itself certain extended privileges, right? So we went over this last class, basically. One key point: whenever any property or the use thereof has been appropriated by His Majesty under the provisions of this act, or any order in council, order or regulation made thereunder, and compensation is to be made therefore, and has not been agreed upon, the claim shall be referred by the Minister of Justice to the Exchequer Court, or to a superior or county court of the province within which the claim arises, or to a judge of any such court. Any ship or vessel used or moved, or any goods, wares or merchandise dealt with, contrary to any order or regulation made under this act, may be seized and detained and shall be liable to forfeiture. So there's a little bit more also that was implied by this bill, right? In other words, personal property became more like, you know, up for grabs by the government or an agency in order to keep the war machine going. Right. In 1988, the Emergencies Act was brought in to replace the War Measures Act. Emergencies Act is even longer. It's like pages and pages. You can get that on the Government of Canada website, pretty much. Published by the Minister of Justice at the following address: http://laws.justice.gc.ca. Yeah, so that's the government website. And basically, the Emergencies Act talks about public welfare emergency, a definition of that, public order emergency, definition, articles, declaration of a public order emergency, international emergency, war emergency, definition, interpretation, orders and regulation, compensation, parliamentary supervision. And basically in the intro, it says an act to authorize the taking of special temporary measures to ensure safety and security during national emergencies, and to amend other acts in consequence thereof. Whereas the safety and security of the individual, the protection of the values of the body politic, and the preservation of the sovereignty, security, and territorial integrity of the state are fundamental obligations of government. And whereas the fulfillment of those obligations in Canada may be seriously threatened by a national emergency, and in order to ensure safety and security during such an emergency, the Governor and Council should be authorized, subject to the supervision of Parliament, to take special temporary measures that may not be appropriate in normal times. And whereas the Governor and Council, in taking such special temporary measures, will be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged even in a national emergency. So, interesting intro for the document. Now it's very long, like I said. Yeah, like 30 pages. But I went over those sections. You get an idea. Go to the website, check it out, because it's there, obviously free. And basically, how this relates to the taxing is not necessarily clear, nor is it implied. So what is a fact, though, is that initially there was the War Measures Act 1914. This act, the War Measures Act 1914, was used to, or through it, the Income Tax Act was brought in. And since that, the War Measures Act was replaced by the Emergencies Act. We bring that up only because, well, who's not paying income tax? Who do you know who doesn't pay income tax? Everybody is still paying income tax, even though the Income Tax Act, was supposed to be reviewed 2 years after the war. It was supposed to be temporary because the war was supposed to be over, right? So when we talk about, it mentions here that the Governor and Council, in taking such special temporary measures, will be subject to the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and must have regard to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, particularly with respect to those fundamental rights that are not to be limited or abridged even in a national emergency. So what doesn't show up here is like United Nations Declaration, rights of indigenous people, rights of a child, etc. Only because, right, it's not necessary within that jurisdiction of Canada Corporation, right? So there's the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms and the Canadian Bill of Rights, and we've mentioned in other classes, there's more we've mentioned that those charters are for government officials. That's what they're for. It's for them to interact with, and it's for them to abide by. So when we talk about more rights, rights of an individual, rights as Aboriginal, that comes under, like for instance in this document, rights that are not to be limited or abridged even in a national emergency. So it's all there. In other words, even as a fraud government, there's still a limitation to the violation, right? Because a corporation can never really violate a natural person and think they can get away with it, right? Unless the natural person doesn't know. And they would never write it down in a document, right? No one's going to write down in a document that they're going to violate anything that the UN says, for instance, you know. But however, the UN, none of the UN things are here, and this is 1988, 85. So you did have a few of those rights of you had rights of the individual, rights of a child, I think, by that time. So like I said, it's about jurisdiction. So we'll go from MSTA of A degrees, North Shore Temple of Science. It's put out by Brother Taj Tariq Bey. You know, always on point. So jurisdiction, page 20. jurisdiction covers, encompasses, assimilates, and incorporates every type and kind of judicial action. Judicial actions pertain to authoritative actions and issues involving justice and the administration of justice in matters of rights of parties, rights of property, and judicial proceedings, etc. Thus, judicial acts involve the exercising of judicial powers to render decisions of discretion or of judgment. In organized government, judicial powers are delegated by constitutional law to specified and oath-bound judicial officers only. The title that attends such judicial powers is called judge. So, there are three types and kinds of jurisdiction: authority, power, control, and there are personam jurisdiction, subject matter jurisdiction, and territorial jurisdiction, as we already know. And there's a breakdown of those. So then when we talk about this judicial power, we go back to Article 3 of the Constitution, the United States Republic of North America. Article 3, Section 1, the judicial power of the United States shall be vested in one Supreme Court and in such inferior courts as the Congress may from time to time establish. The judges of both the Supreme and inferior courts shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall at stated times receive for their services a compensation, which shall not be diminished during their continuance in office. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution, the laws of the United States, and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to all controversies to which the United States shall be a party. Okay. So in other words, when it comes to ambassadors, right, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers, and consuls, right, all three of those, that's what we have within the temple. So that's what we build toward, right, or in some cases we have, so that as an ambassador, okay, it becomes from the perspective of the United States of America Republic under the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court, right? So that was just following up on the last class and those topics that we just discussed. A little news article that caught our attention, because we always do a little news, you know how we do. There's an article here from the Toronto Sun, July, so from today, and I think if you get out the paper, it's on the front cover of the paper. Muslim street cleric wants to protect Canadian women from sex assault by forcing them to cover up. And then there's, on the website, there's a video. Just from the article, however, I'll just quote a little bit of it. Canadian laws should be changed to require women to cover themselves, quote, to prevent sexual assault, says an Islamic street preacher in Toronto. Al-Hashim Kamina Atangana, a 33-year-old Islamic convert, called for legal change in response to recent sex attacks at York University. Atangana is connected with a group called Muslim Support Network and is one of a number of street corner clerics commonly seen at the Yonge and Dundas streets. In an email to the Toronto Sun, Atangana said the reason these sex attacks are continuously happening is because of Canadian laws which give too much freedom to women when it comes to how they dress. You should take your example from the way Muslim women dress, he wrote. Why does Muslim women who wear a long dress and cover her head aren't targeted for sex attacks? Question. So that was his stance, piece of his stance on this issue, based on his position. So, you know, it's building with Grand Sheik. As you can see, today is a at-home class. So I'm just here, just me, solo dolo, and but building with Grand Sheik, he just mentioned, well, this guy's asking for Canadian laws to be changed to make women cover up. Think about that. So first of all, he's asking for, right, corporate structure to change its corporate laws to prevent, right, or to force natural beings, right, or people who may include natural beings and who should include natural beings to do a certain thing, right, or to present themselves a certain way. So regardless of the issue of covering up or not covering up, there's always this mismatch, right, of the jurisdiction and the subject matter, or the status and the jurisdiction. If you're here, right, and brother says he's a Muslim, etc., he has his name, then your laws, you're supposed to bring your own laws, right? Talking about if women want to prevent being sexually assaulted, they should cover themselves, said Atangana, adding that while he doesn't expect Western women to dress as Muslim women do, they should have a dress code and take note of the burqa and headscarf and face veil some Muslim females wear. So from the perspective of the social, like that's another point that he made. Okay, that's a valid point. But when he started talking about laws, you know what I mean, just this, it's a skewed way of putting things, of talking about things. Because then you go into real law and the Constitution, and you can't tell a person how to dress under the Constitution. So who is this person that is supposedly a cleric, but they don't know the basic laws of the land? Basic laws of the land, Constitution, and all treaties entered into previously or which shall be entered into, right? Like it says in the Constitution, Article, I believe it's Article 3. Oh, sorry. Let's get the article. Yeah, Article 3, Section 2. The judicial power shall extend to all cases in law and equity arising under this Constitution. The laws of the United States and treaties made or which shall be made under their authority, to all cases affecting ambassadors, other public ministers and consuls, to all cases of admiralty and maritime jurisdiction, to controversies to which the United States shall be a party, to controversies between two or more states, between a state and citizens of another state, between citizens of different states, between citizens of the same state claiming lands under grants of different states, and between a state or the citizens thereof and foreign states, citizens or subjects. Okay, understand. That includes the states that are in the United States, right? New York, so-called like Pennsylvania, Texas, those states, but also foreign states, citizens and subjects. It was a claim that was made, right? And no one argued the claim. In fact, people took the Constitution, the concept, and modeling their societies after it now. But this one was first to make that type of claim, right? That the Supreme Court of the United States of America Republic, right, shall have the power, the judicial power, right, the power to judge. And then people ask, well, why does the United States, this country that they think they can go around and judge? Well, it's beyond attitude. It's in the Constitution. You should have addressed that, but no, because people made money out of the United States. People went in, and it was the get-rich-quick scheme, you know, on an international level, like large organizations, right, being opened up to this new market, right, that they could make money, right, legitimate or illegitimate, and just cake, right? But the Constitution wasn't changed. The Constitution stands, and of course, no one argued it, because why mess up the apple cart, right? They're baking a lot of pies. Nobody wanted to mess up the apple cart. But that's a charge. It says it in the Constitution that their Supreme Court, they give their Supreme Court that type of authority. So, just 1 second here. So one of the treaties that the United States signed onto has to do with, right, so one of these treaties has to do with the same war, First World War, right, and what happened. So we talked about how the United States and Great Britain had had their own tax schemes that were brought in around the same time. Canada did the same, right? One thing, however, that's different is that the United States, after the war, didn't sign this Treaty of Versailles, right? Treaty of Versailles, 1919, 1918, to bring a peace, right, an end to the war, so-called armistice. So this article here, titled U.S. Peace Treaty with Germany. Germany and the United States of America, considering that the United States, acting in conjunction with its co-belligerents, entered into an armistice with Germany on November 11, 1918, in order that a treaty of peace might be concluded. Considering that the Treaty of Versailles was signed on June 28, 1919, and came into force according to the terms of its Article 440, but has not been ratified by the United States, considering that the Congress of the United States passed a joint resolution approved by the President July 2, 1921, which reads in part as follows: Resolved by the Senate and House of Representatives of the United States of America in Congress assembled, that the state of war declared to exist between the Imperial German Government and the United States of America by the joint resolution of Congress approved April 6, 1917, is hereby declared at an end. That in making this declaration, and as a part of it, there are expressly reserved to the United States of America and its nationals any and all rights, privileges, indemnities, reparations, or advantages, together with the right to enforce the same, to which it or they have become entitled under the terms of the armistice signed November 11, 1918, or any extensions and modifications thereof, or which were acquired by or are in the possession of the United States of America by reason of its participation in the war, or to which its nationals have thereby become rightfully entitled, or which under the Treaty of Versailles have been stipulated for its or their benefit, or to which it is entitled as one of the principal allied and associated powers, or to which it is entitled by virtue of any act or acts of Congress or otherwise. Okay? So that was all the first section of this treaty. And so instead of the Treaty of Versailles, there was this treaty, right? However, as you see, as we heard, the Treaty of Versailles is mentioned, right? And that the nationals, so not citizens, this is 1921, this treaty. So 1921, Drew Early had already come, 1913. started doing things, or old Canaanite temple, and then already by 1921, more Holy Temple, right? And was already teaching. The movement had already started to grow, right? So that if there's a treaty signed, a treaty that says nationals have thereby become rightfully entitled, or which under the Treaty of Versailles have been stipulated for its or their benefit. Right? There's a clear connection there. Right? The reason why I put emphasis on this is because as far as I know, only reparations paid by any losers of the so-called war was reparations from Germany to other European nations. In other words, if the United States had signed the Treaty of Versailles, they probably would have got paid too. Even though the treaty that they signed says that, yeah, our nationals are entitled to any privileges, immunities, etc., etc. Think about that. Basically, it was at a point where the nationals, right, weren't being responsible, and people who, like in the beginning, using the United States just as this, money washing laundromat, right? International money laundering laundromat. Just said, well, we don't need the money either. We don't need reparations, so they don't want it. There's no point in going through that hassle, because there's more profit, right, that we could make by not asking for reparations, because it's going to go to the government, right? And these would be private interests, bankers, I don't know, people who, from the beginning, like I said, using the United States as a laundromat, right? Using the land, your birthright, right? Using the Moors' birthright and inheritance, right? And it's cheating it. So nationals receiving reparations would kind of hinder that, right? It would have people thinking, well, okay, what's my status? Am I entitled to these? Okay, then what is my status? Right? Because a black person isn't going to get reparations, even from fighting in a war. So when it comes to everyone else in the United States, it's just the same situation of thinking that citizenship is the same as nationality. It's not. It can't be. And you can't have a thriving economy if you have no nationals. You can't just have an open market and say anybody can set up shop anywhere and do whatever. Meanwhile, there's people who live in the market, right, who will never leave and can't leave. Like, the market is the only place that they're really allowed. And even when they travel out, they have to first have made money in order to travel out. And if a lot of them are poor, or a lot of them don't have, or are uneducated, then every day you open up the market and there's going to be depression in the market. That's just the way it is. So this concept of recession, boom, depression, etc., etc., yeah, but the baseline has already been lowered. The average is already down, because you talk about Moors, that's what, 13% of the population, the 2010 census. So imagine 13% of all the people in a market. most of that 13% are just sitting there, you know, chilling, not doing anything, not selling anything, buying when they have, but you know, times get tough and they're not buying anything except whatever they don't need. So probably just be a short class today. There are a few other things. I was gonna see if there may be any questions, but nobody on the online right now. Yeah, so there's that news article. If there's anything else to touch on. Confused about taxes. Taj Tariq Day. So in last class we read a little bit from this book. Okay, here's a reading that we'll do. What is income within the meaning of the 16th Amendment? Alright, so we talk about status, reparations, or we'll go back to taxes and status now. This decision is noteworthy since the court reviewed and relied upon most of the foregoing case law citations presented before arriving at its conclusion. In Goodrich v. Edwards 225 U.S. 2527, 1921, the Supreme Court defines income as follows. The definition of income approved by this court is the gain derived from capital, from labor, or for both combined, provided to be understood to include profits gained through sale or conversion of capital assets. Okay? The gain derived from labor contemplated in the Goodrich case, supra, and in previous and subsequent cases where the phrase is used means the actual gain or profit derived from contracting the services of laborers or employees. This refers to gains acquired above and beyond the principal investment. Moreover, the pecuniary wage considerations or compensations which natural persons derive from salaries, employments, wages, and occupations are distinct from and not included in the aforementioned definition of income. So, all that to say what? Well, let's go over it again. We'll go over the case. The definition of income approved by this court is, this is Supreme Court. So when it says this court, talking about Goodrich versus Edwards, 225 U.S. 527, 1921, the Supreme Court defines income as the gain derived from capital, from labor, or for both combined, provided to be understood to include capital gains through sale or conversion of capital assets. So the only way that income tax is allowed, right, is approved, is if it's from capital or labor that, right, are part of profits gained through conversion of capital assets. So in other words, as it says later on, the labor, when it talks about labor, is not the labor of the individual who's filing the taxes. It's the labor of a thing. So if you have a mule and the mule labors hours and hours and hours, right, you're going to make profits out of that mule carrying stuff, right, or that mule plowing the field. And then you have a person who sits on the wagon and plows, so there's the hours of that human being, right, and then the hours of the mule. Except in this case of slavery, the human being is a thing. It looks like a human being, but the status is that of chattel property. Just like the mule, two pieces of chattel property, working, making profits for the person who sits, you know, on the balcony and chills, right? That's why that person has to be taxed, or that is the case in where income tax is brought in, right? Otherwise, as it says, natural persons derived from salaries, employments, and wages and occupations are distinct from and not included in the aforementioned definition of income. So, to get a hold of this, contact myself, Rashi Kujo Adwal. online, www.canaanlandmoors.webs.com. Catch us on this Ustream Mondays, Tuesdays,